The provisional agenda for this meeting is threats to international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Belarus, Latvia, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Poland, and Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Mr. President, we noted with deep concern the reports that Russian military drones entered Poland in violation of Polish airspace. Our briefing today relies entirely on publicly available information. The United Nations is not in a position to verify or confirm claims or reports regarding the incident. On 10 September, Poland informed the President of the Security Council that during the night of 9 and 10 September, 19 Russian drones entered Polish airspace. Some of them were shot down preemptively. This is not the first time that drones have been detected in neighboring countries during the full-scale war in Ukraine, but it is the first time that multiple drones have flown so deep into a neighboring country's airspace. It is also the first time that force was used by Poland and its NATO allies to neutralize the perceived threat. According to Poland's Ministry of Interior and Administration, wreckage from some 16 drones have been found across central and eastern Poland. Media reports suggest that at least some of these devices were so-called Gebera drones used by the Russian Federation in the war in Ukraine. The drones reportedly caused damage in residential areas in the Polish villages of Wiriki and Chusnowka. Drone debris was also reported in the town of Chesniki. Fortunately, Polish authorities reported no casualties. 4 major airports, including those in Warsaw and Rzeszów, were temporarily closed and flights diverted. Poland authorities stated that some of the drones entered from Belarus. The Belarusian Ministry of Defense claimed that the Russian drones were deflected by counter-drone measures of Ukrainian forces and veered off course. Belarus stated that it had alerted Poland and Lithuania as drones approached their airspace. This was confirmed by the Polish military. Belarus also reported that its air defenses intercepted several drones over its territory. Following the incident, Poland introduced restrictions to air traffic in the eastern part of the country in areas neighboring Belarus and Ukraine. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that Russia had no intention to engage any targets on the territory of Poland. The Russian authorities acknowledged carrying out, during the same time period, and I quote, a massive strike with long-range, land-based, sea-based, and air-based high-precision weapons, as well as attack drones against the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, end quote, in western Ukrainian regions. The Russian Federation also expressed their readiness to hold consultations with Polish authorities on the matter. Following the incident, Poland invoked Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which led to consultations among the Allies on 10 September. Mr. President, we reiterate the Secretary General's call for all concerned to act responsibly and to avoid any action and rhetoric that would further escalate already dangerously high tensions. This alarming incident took place against the backdrop of continued large-scale Russian missile and drone attacks on Ukraine. According to President Zelensky, during the night of 9 to 10 September, Russia launched 415 drones and over 40 cruise and ballistic missiles against 15 regions of Ukraine, resulting in civilian casualties, including at least one death. On 9 September, in the frontline village of Yarova in Donetsk region, a guided bomb reportedly struck a group of mostly elderly civilians waiting for pension payments, killing at least 24 and injuring 18. On 7 September, Russian attacks across Kiev, Zaporizhia, Kryvyi, Odessa, Sumy, and Chernihiv killed and injured civilians and damaged civilian infrastructure. Among those killed was a woman with her newborn child in Kiev. In central Kiev, a government building housing the offices of Ukraine's prime minister was struck for the first time since the start of the war, making a further escalation. New Russian aerial attacks were reported again on the night of 10 and 11 September. The intensification of the war is borne out by the growing number of casualties. According to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, at least 208 civilians were killed and 827 injured in Ukraine in August 2025 alone. Short-range drones caused the highest number of casualties, killing 58 and injuring 272 civilians last August. August and September also saw an increase in attacks affecting energy infrastructure, particularly gas facilities, once again raising fears of a new wave of targeted attacks against Ukraine's critical infrastructure ahead of the approaching winter. Mr. President, we are equally concerned about the continuing impact of the war on civilians in Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine and within the Russian Federation. On 8 September, in the Russian-occupied Donetsk region of Ukraine, Russian officials reported that 2 people were killed and 16 people were injured by an alleged Ukrainian drone strike. A day earlier, an alleged Ukrainian attack reportedly struck a playground, injuring 6 civilians, including a 14-year-old girl in the same region, according to Russian officials. Attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure violate international humanitarian law. They are unacceptable and must end immediately wherever they occur. Mr. President, this week's events underline the dangerous impact of this war on the security of the region and the risk of escalation. This incident also endangers the recent diplomatic efforts to achieve an end to this unprovoked and brutal war. We therefore, once again, urgently call for a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine. The end state must be a just, comprehensive, and sustainable peace in line with the UN Charter, international law, and relevant UN resolutions. The United Nations remains available to support all genuine efforts to this end. Thank you.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing and for her contribution to the discussion. And I welcome His Excellency Marcin Bosacki, the Secretary of State of Poland, in the chamber. Mr. President, Slovenia supported the call for today's meeting. This reflects our firm solidarity with Poland and our full support for its security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. We strongly condemn the escalation of Russian attacks against Ukraine. What we are witnessing is not only continued brutality within Ukraine, but also a new and dangerous era of intimidation directed at Ukraine's neighbors. Since 2022, we have seen repeated violations of the sovereign airspace of European states, but never on such a scale. Slovenia strongly condemns this incursion into Polish airspace. It is unacceptable. Colleagues, let us be clear. Such mistakes do not happen. They are no incident. They are aggressive and dangerous acts, as it is hard to imagine that so many drones flew so deep over Polish territory unintentionally. I'm sure all colleagues sitting around this table understand the unease and concern that arises in the region when a country already notorious as a serious violator of the UN Charter acts in such way. It is very hard not to look at this incident as yet another tactic of terror. Colleagues, Europe is deeply alarmed. It is even harder to comprehend Russian reckless behavior if we take into account the diplomatic efforts of the United States to end the war in Ukraine. This escalation comes at a moment when there had been hopes for renewed prospects for peace. Instead of talks and diplomacy, the post-Anchorage period has become synonymous with massive strikes. We are witnessing attacks on civilians and infrastructure, including diplomatic premises and government buildings, at scales not seen since the start of the war. Colleagues, such behavior is a direct threat not only to the security of the EU citizens, but also regional stability and international peace. Path down the road Russia is choosing today leads in a downward spiral of escalation, war, and destruction. Slovenia therefore once again calls on the Russian Federation to cease this irresponsible behavior, commit to an immediate ceasefire, and to start serious and meaningful peace negotiations. We firmly stand with Poland, Ukraine, or any other member of this organization who needs to be protected against unlawful, charter-trampling actions of members who feel that their might give them right and impunity. Thank you.
The representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Denmark fully supports Poland in calling for this emergency meeting in response to the serious violations of its airspace by drones launched from Russian and Belarus territories. We thank the Presidency for heeding this call so swiftly, and we thank Undersecretary General Di Carlo for her informative briefing. I also wish to welcome to this meeting His Excellency the State Secretary of Poland. Mr. President, Denmark condemns this violation of Polish sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is a dangerous and reckless escalation that is completely unacceptable and deeply concerning. Our resolve to stand by our allies remains firm. Together with our EU partners and NATO allies, we will continue to offer support to Poland in protecting its borders. Let there be no doubt, Denmark fully supports the territorial integrity of all countries in line with the UN Charter. Mr. President, the violation of Polish airspace by Russian drones has taken place in the midst of relentless Russian drone attacks in Ukraine. Russian drones are being used to terrorize the people of Ukraine. They're responsible for countless casualties in cities and on the front line, and increasingly bringing death, destruction, and misery to the civilian population of Ukraine. The Russian military-industrial complex has been scaled up dramatically to produce drones in huge quantities. they're becoming a serious threat not only to Ukraine, but to all countries bordering Russia. The incursions into Poland's airspace took place less than a day after a massive air attack in Ukraine, where at least 24 elderly civilians were killed while simply waiting outside to collect their monthly pension. It took place 3 days after the single largest Russian aerial attacks on Ukraine's cities during the war, where 4 civilians were killed and 44 wounded, including many children. And it took place 1 week after the drone and missile blitz in Kyiv, killing 25, including 4 children. These never-ending violations of international law, these aggressions, will only reinforce our determination to continue supporting Ukraine with what it needs to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, to exercise its inherent right to self-defense in the face of Russia's unprovoked and illegal full-scale invasion. We've said it many times. There is a simple alternative, a simple solution. Just one man in the Kremlin could decide to stop his armed forces attacking Ukraine. Unfortunately, Russia's leader appears to have chosen to prolong this war of conquest and to continue down the path of death, destruction, and misery. Mr. President, what we have witnessed over the skies over Poland is a reminder that Russia's drone surge is not by any means restricted to the war of aggression in Ukraine. And this violation of Polish airspace is not only the most recent Russian violation of the airspace of its neighbors. It is also a reminder that Russia's war of aggression poses an inherent threat to international peace and stability. It undermines the fundamentals of international law that we all benefit from. This is why we urge Russia to change its course, to opt for peace, to respect the territorial integrity of its neighbors. Until Russia changes course, we'll continue to increase the costs for Russia and its enablers. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the Republic of Korea for convening the emergency meeting. At the outset, I would like to thank USG DiCarlo for her insightful briefing, and I welcome the participation of the Secretary of State of Poland. Mr. President, the latest and most serious violation of the airspace of Poland, an EU and NATO member, constitutes a reckless act and is part of a serious escalation which threatens the security of citizens, regional stability, and international peace. It shows that Russia is shifting away from the path to peace, choosing instead the road to provocation. In view of the latest development, allow me to make a few points. First, Greece strongly condemns the incursion of the Polish airspace by at least 19 Russian drones and expresses its relief that no human lives were lost. We stand in full solidarity with the government and the people of Poland, and we hope that such incidents shall not be repeated. We emphatically condemn any violation of internationally recognized borders, be it land, air, or sea border, as an act that is blatantly against international law and the UN Charter. We also call on Russia to cease these unlawful acts immediately and respect its obligations under international law. Second, this new escalation is a direct result of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. At a time when decisive peace efforts by the United States and President Trump offer us a glimmer of hope, Russia intensifies its attacks against Ukraine. Lastly, aggression breeds more aggression. War will lead to more war. The spillover effect of violence, which has now affected Poland, has the potential to spiral out of control and needs to stop immediately. I reiterate my country's firm conviction that an immediate ceasefire is needed, as necessary first step towards a permanent, comprehensive, just, and lasting peace settlement, based on the principles of sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of states. Mr. President, colleagues, Russia's war on Ukraine is not only a European problem, despite the latest deplorable incursion into Polish space. It can seriously undermine global stability and security, drawing in actors from other regions. Any future peace agreement should therefore be founded on credible and robust security guarantees, which will effectively deter any recurrence of armed aggression. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je remercie tout d'abord Madame la Secrétaire générale adjointe aux affaires politiques, Madame Rosemary Di Carlo, pour son exposé. Je salue la présence de Son Excellence, Monsieur le Secrétaire d'État du gouvernement polonais, Marcin Bosacki. Les remarques de Madame Di Carlo confirment la gravité des faits. Alors que la Russie a procédé dans la nuit du 9 au 10 septembre dernier à une nouvelle attaque aérienne massive contre l'Ukraine, une vingtaine de ces drones se sont donc introduits en Pologne, détruisant au moins une habitation, provoquant la fermeture de 4 aéroports et atteignant jusqu'à la région de Gdansk, à plus de 700 km de la frontière ukrainienne. Tels sont les faits. Il s'agit là d'une action irresponsable et d'une nouvelle escalade de la part de la Russie dans le contexte de sa guerre d'agression contre l'Ukraine. Monsieur le Président, le souhait de la Pologne de tenir cette réunion d'urgence du Conseil à la suite de cette violation intolérable de son intégrité territoriale est légitime et il était du devoir du Conseil d'y répondre. La France condamne l'incursion inacceptable de drones russes sur le territoire polonais et elle exprime son entière solidarité avec la Pologne au nom de notre engagement plein et entier aux côtés de nos alliés de l'Union européenne et de l'OTAN. Comme l'a annoncé hier le Président de la République, la France renforce dès à présent son soutien à la défense aérienne de la Pologne et du flanc est de l'Europe. Nous ne céderons pas aux intimidations de la Russie. Monsieur le Président, cette incursion est intervenue alors que la Russie intensifie les opérations contre l'Ukraine. Le 9 septembre, des frappes russes ont tué au moins 25 civils dans le village ukrainien de Yarova. Et 2 jours auparavant, la Russie frappait pour la première fois depuis 2022 le siège du gouvernement ukrainien à Kiev. La France condamne la poursuite des bombardements massifs de la Russie à l'encontre des villes, des institutions, des infrastructures et des populations ukrainiennes. Elle salue la résistance de l'Ukraine. Elle continuera à la soutenir avec détermination dans la défense de sa souveraineté et de son intégrité territoriale. Avec les États-Unis, les Européens et d'autres partenaires, nous avons élaboré une offre de garantie de sécurité solide pour l'Ukraine qui permettront une paix durable une fois un cessez-le-feu agréé. C'est le sens de la réunion qui s'est tenue à Paris le 4 septembre dernier autour du Président de la République. Monsieur le Président, au lieu de prendre le chemin d'une désescalade dans la guerre ouverte qu'elle a décidé de lancer en 2022, la Russie fait le choix d'accroître encore la menace qu'elle fait peser sur la sécurité de toute l'Europe et la stabilité mondiale. Elle ignore délibérément les résolutions de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies qui l'a appelée à de multiples reprises à mettre fin aux hostilités. Par cette dangereuse fuite en avant, la Russie méconnaît les efforts diplomatiques engagés par le président des États-Unis pour parvenir à un cessez-le-feu, effort que nous soutenons dans la perspective d'une paix juste et durable. Faut-il rappeler que l'Ukraine a accepté, il y a 6 mois déjà, le principe d'un cessez-le-feu immédiat et sans condition, et que le président ukrainien, Volodymyr Zelensky, a exprimé sa disponibilité pour des négociations directes avec le président de la Fédération de Russie, Vladimir Poutine. Monsieur le Président, pour la France, cette réunion du Conseil de sécurité, organe des Nations unies en charge du maintien de la paix et de la sécurité internationale, est l'occasion de redire à la Russie, membre permanent de ce Conseil, qu'il est temps qu'elle cesse de prétendre vouloir la paix alors qu'elle refuse, en fait, l'arrêt des hostilités. Alors qu'elle étend chaque jour le champ de ses actions violentes et déstabilisatrices, il revient bien à la Russie de mettre fin à son escalade et de négocier sérieusement, comme l'y appelle l'ensemble de la communauté internationale. Il en va de la sécurité de tous. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I also thank Under-Secretary General Di Carlo for her briefing. I join others in welcoming His Excellency, the State Secretary of Poland. On Tuesday, not only did we receive reports of yet another Russian attack on Ukraine, but also of an egregious violation of Polish and NATO airspace by Russian drones. This was not the first time Russian drones have violated Polish airspace, but this latest incident was unprecedented in scale. Around 20 drones entered Polish territory, prompting the closure of major airports. Several required interception for the first time by Polish and NATO air defence. Shelter-in-place warnings were issued to over 8 million Polish citizens. It is very fortunate that there were no casualties, unlike last time. We commend the swift and effective response by Polish and NATO forces against this gross violation of Poland's sovereign airspace. The United Kingdom stands in full solidarity with Poland and with Ukraine. We will continue to work with our NATO allies to defend every inch of Allied territory. Russia's aggression only strengthens the unity between NATO nations and our determination to stand with Ukraine. As my Prime Minister said, this was an extremely reckless move by Russia. It serves to remind us of President Putin's blatant disregard for peace, of the constant bombardment innocent Ukrainians face every day, and the threat that Russia's actions pose to European and international security. Russia continues to violate the basic principles of the UN Charter. Open source imagery of these incursions confirms the United Kingdom's own assessment. These were Russian drones. We categorically reject Russia's denials and attempts to diminish the seriousness of this incident. Since the start of Russia's so-called special military operation, we keep seeing what Russia describes as isolated incidents. Representatives of the Russian Federation have repeatedly, and as recently as yesterday, said in this Council that we should call a spade a spade. So let me do just that. This was no isolated incident. In 2022, we saw hundreds of civilians killed in Russia's attacks on Bucha and Irpin. Last year, I spoke in this Council about Russia's cowardly attack on a children's hospital in Kyiv. Since May of this year, we have witnessed the 20 largest air attacks of the entire war. We've witnessed 34,000 drones launched against Ukrainian civilians this year alone. We've seen 1,700 Ukrainians killed and over 8,300 injured. There's been a threefold increase in the number of child casualties in the last 3 months alone. Government buildings have been struck. There have been relentless attacks on critical national infrastructure. This is all part of a clear pattern of escalation. And these actions shake the foundations of international peace and security, and they show Putin for what he truly is. But we are not intimidated, and we are determined to increase the pressure on Putin. Today, on her visit to Kyiv, my Foreign Secretary announced 100 new sanctions targeting Russia's military sector and shadow fleet. And NATO has confirmed it will launch Operation Eastern Sentry to bolster our defences on the eastern flank. President, we call on Russia to end its brutal and illegal war and engage in meaningful negotiations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席，我要感谢迪卡洛副秘书长的通报，也欢迎波兰国务秘书出席今天的会议。中方一贯主张各国遵循联合国宪章的宗旨和原则处理国际关系。我们注意到波兰、俄罗斯、白俄罗斯等有关各方近日围绕无人机事件的表态和反应，呼吁
We call on all parties to exercise calm and restraint, properly settle disputes through dialogue and consultation, avoid misunderstanding and misjudgment, and prevent any possible expansion or escalation of the situation. In the current context, any misunderstanding or misjudgment will deepen the trust deficit. Any confrontational rhetoric may spark an escalation, and any military clash could trigger broader instability. President, this drone incident is the result of a spillover of the Ukraine crisis. In the recent past, we witnessed some positive momentum of dialogue and negotiations, yet significant gaps persist in the positions and claims of the parties concerned across a range of critical issues. The road to restoring peace is still long and arduous. Meanwhile, the situation on the battlefield remains extremely grave. The profound suffering of ordinary people is deeply distressing. What the international community needs most at present is goodwill rather than hostility, mutual accommodation in place of military confrontation, and de-escalation rather than further escalation. China calls on all parties to adhere to the three principles, namely, no spillover of the battlefield, no escalation of the conflict, and no fueling of the flames by any party, and act without delay to promote de-escalation. We urge the parties concerned to demonstrate political will, sustain the momentum for peace talks, continue building consensus, and strive to reach a peace agreement as soon as possible. We also call on the international community and regional countries to foster a positive atmosphere, create favorable conditions, and provide necessary assistance to this end. President, China's position on the Ukraine issue has been objective, impartial, and consistent. We are committed to promoting peace talks and seeking a political solution. Guided by the 4 shoes proposed by President Xi Jinping, China has been working tirelessly for peace, making every effort to promote dialogue. We stayed engaged with the parties concerned, sent a special envoy for shuttle diplomacy, and initiated the Friends for Peace group at the UN to consolidate consensus for peace and advance peace efforts. China stands ready to continue working with the international community to play a constructive role in promoting an early political settlement of the crisis. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Guyana appreciates the Presidency's swift response in convening today's meeting at Poland's request, and thanks USG DiCarlo for her briefing. We also welcome the participation of the Secretary of State of Poland and representatives of Latvia, the Kingdom of Netherlands, Belarus, Ukraine, and the European Union in this meeting. Mr. President, Guyana is deeply distressed about the emerging trend of eroding respect for international law, including the United Nations Charter. Yesterday, we gathered in this very room to condemn Israel's most recent and atrocious breach of the most fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter when it struck Doha on Tuesday. Today, the Security Council is once again called upon to address allegations of breaches of national sovereignty and the provisions of the United Nations Charter. In his letter of 10 September, the permanent representative of Poland notified the President of the Security Council that Russian drones had crossed into Poland's airspace between the evening of 9th of September and the morning of 10th of September and were preemptively shot down. one of the drones reportedly struck a residential building in eastern Poland. We have taken note of subsequent public statements issued by Russian authorities in response to the incident, including their readiness to hold consultations with Polish authorities. Mr. President, even as investigations into the incidents continue, the Security Council must emphasize restraint and de-escalation. Indeed, we must do so firmly and unequivocally and insist that the facts surrounding the incident be thoroughly clarified. International law grants each sovereign nation complete and exclusive sovereignty over the airspace above its territory, and any violation, especially under current conditions, could understandably be viewed as a threat or act of aggression. The gravity of this situation, therefore, cannot be underestimated. In choosing to join the United Nations and accepting the obligations of its charter, we each agreed to be bound by all its provisions, including the prohibition on the use of force. Enshrined in Article 2.4, this prohibition is one of the Charter's most explicit provisions and the foremost foundational principle of international law. Guyana therefore reiterates that every member state of the United Nations has an obligation to uphold these principles of the UN Charter and the wider body of international law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo, for your briefing, and I welcome the participation of the Secretary of State of Poland. On September 10th, Russian military drones violated the airspace of Poland, a NATO member. The United States stands by our NATO allies in the face of these alarming airspace violations. The United States is consulting with Poland and our other NATO allies under Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty. And rest assured, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. This incident does not help the extraordinary efforts that the United States has undertaken in recent weeks to broker an end to the war. Since the Alaska summit between President Trump and President Putin on August 15th, Russia has intensified its bombing campaign against Ukraine, resulting in loss of life and damage to civilian infrastructure. These actions, now with the addition of violating the airspace of a U.S. ally, intentionally or otherwise, show immense disrespect for good faith U.S. efforts to bring an end to this conflict. We urge Russia to renew and live up to its commitment to diplomacy by seeking an immediate end to hostilities through direct negotiations with Ukraine. Colleagues, the Russia-Ukraine war needs to end. We cannot risk it escalating into a broader conflict. Russia must demonstrate its seriousness by taking immediate, concrete steps toward peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank USG DiCarlo for her comprehensive briefing on developments unfolding in the Eastern European region. The situation continues to be a great concern and carries serious implications for regional stability and international norms. The significant divergence in narratives underscores the urgency of the situation and the critical need for diplomacy and dialogue. The protection of civilian life and critical infrastructure must remain a paramount concern. Such incidents highlight the fragility and volatility in the region. They remind us of the fundamental principle enshrined in the international law and the United Nations Charter. We firmly maintain that there is no military solution to the ongoing war in the region. Continued escalations only serve to heighten tensions and undermine the prospects for durable peace. We believe that lasting solutions are found at the negotiating table, not through acts that can be interpreted as hostile. In this regard, we call upon all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to engage in earnest, substantive dialogue. A durable resolution will require a genuine commitment to de-escalation, confidence-building measures, and renewed focus on diplomatic efforts. To conclude, Mr. President, my delegation reaffirms its unwavering support for all efforts aimed at upholding the principles of international law and achieving just and lasting solution consistent with the United Nations Charter. The people in the region deserve a future defined by peace, security, and stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Mr. President, today, the members of the Security Council have been proposed to discuss an incident on Polish soil which took place on the evening of 9 to 10 September. According to the reports from the Polish Operational Command, in the airspace of that state, more than a dozen unmanned aerial vehicles entered that airspace. It has been announced that part of them have been were neutralized by air defense systems. A home in the Lublinsk region was damaged, and there were no casualties. Warsaw recognized that the drones could have flown in from the territory of Ukraine. At the same time, Poland hastily pinned blame on Russia without presenting any evidence whatsoever. We think it is important to analyze the real magnitude of the consequences of the incident and to compare this with the political clickbait which is being advanced by Polish and other European politicians, as well as to pose additional questions about the versions that have been circulating about what transpired. On the 10th of September, Warsaw published data about fragments of drones that fell, and specifically a photograph was demonstrated of a roof of a home that had been damaged. However, any military expert will confirm that if this indeed was an explosion of a drone warhead weighing tens of kilograms, the consequences would have been different. Here, what took place was a localized damage, more likely a consequence of falling wreckage. Furthermore, later, the Polish authorities were indeed compelled to acknowledge that they did not find drone warheads on their territory. Equally telling is another incident with a device that was found in an agricultural field. Apparently, it simply veered off course and fell, and this indeed could have been the consequence of a technical malfunction or the result of the use of Ukrainian radio-electronic warfare means. Now, turning to actions by the Russian Federation. On the 10th of September, that evening, the Russian armed forces carried out long-range, land-based, sea-based, and air-based high-precision weapon strikes, as well as drone strikes targeting military-industrial facilities on the territory of Ukraine, where there was manufacturing and maintenance facilities for armored and aviation equipment of the UAF, as well as engines and electronic parts for this. There were no targets marked on Polish territory. The maximum range of the drones used in this strike did not exceed 700 kilometers, which makes it physically impossible for them to have reached Polish territory. Despite the obvious baselessness of the allegations levied against us, in order to provide for comprehensive and objective elucidation of what took place, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation expressed a willingness to engage in professional dialogue and consultations with the Ministry of Defense of Poland. The Russian Foreign Ministry, in turn, also stands ready to engage in this work if the Polish side indeed is interested in reducing tensions rather than fomenting tensions. We call upon Polish colleagues to take advantage of these proposals rather than engaging in megaphone diplomacy at multilateral platforms. We have already repeatedly stated that we are not interested in escalating tensions with Warsaw, and we repeat that today. What warrants separate mention is a constructive and responsible approach of the Belarusian side in the context of what transpired. The relevant organs of the Republic of Belarus, through the relevant mechanisms, promptly informed Polish colleagues about existing risks, having demonstrated a responsible approach and a willingness to engage in cooperation. This is a policy which is based on exchange of objective information, coordination of action, and it should serve as an example for a good faith conduct amid such incidents. Mr. President, unfortunately, the reaction to the incident in Polish and European political establishment and media outlets gives rise, under these circumstances, to significant questions. The head of EU diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, without having awaited official conclusions, rushed to make loud statements about the alleged deliberate violation of Polish airspace, advancing her favorite talking point about investments in European defense, that is, continuation of the militarization thereof. Hysterical outbursts about the alleged aggression from the Russian Federation is also heard from other European capitals. This is all very similar to the information campaign, the goal of which is to maintain the level of external mobilization around Ukraine and to continue to egg on allies to continue to provide new and new weapons. In this vein, we would be well advised to recall the incident which occurred in Przewód in November 2022, when, as a result of the fall of a missile, 2 Polish citizens died. At that point, tensions were also being ignited. However, 1 year later, the General Prosecutor and the Minister of Justice, Zbigniew Zerbo, recognized that both the launch location and the ownership of the missile were Ukrainian. And the former president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, in an interview with the journalist Bogdan Romanowski, recently explicitly recognized that at that point the Kiev regime was attempting to pressure Warsaw to levy accusations against Russia. According to him, this was a deliberate attempt to draw Poland and consequently NATO into an armed conflict. This candid comment from the Polish politician is an important recognition, which is not being quoted by European newspapers, nor discussed it in national parliaments, but we think it is important today to remind you of this. We are talking about a desire of Kiev to at all costs engage in the confrontation with Russia. More and more states. It is no secret that Ukraine has long been consistently attempting to expand the geography of the conflict with no regard for the consequences of such an escalation. The Polish authorities, for all of these years, in an anti-Russian frenzy, were willing to support any, regardless of how criminal, regardless of how reckless, any actions of the Kiev regime, and were eagerly indulging it, hoping to harm the Russian Federation using its hands. Unfortunately, the Polish authorities are not drawing any conclusions, and they're continuing to engage in a policy of escalation in Europe. For example, at the pretext of conducting a joint Russian-Belarusian exercises, the West Zapad 2025, the Polish authorities already announced the closure of the border with Belarus, and they announced the intention to deploy to that area up to 40,000 military personnel. Let us recall that our above-mentioned strategic exercises are defensive in nature. They do not pose any threat for any neighboring country. And the representatives of OSCE countries, including Poland, have been invited to observe them. However, the decision was taken, the border is closed, and the victims of this decision are ordinary citizens whose freedom of movement has been denied. In any conflict, when we are talking about provocations, the key question remains unchanged. Who does this benefit? The response here is obvious. All of this artificially blown up hysteria is beneficial exclusively to the head of the Kiev regime and the European Party of War, who are desperately trying to derail prospects for Ukrainian resolution, which began to take shape as a result of the Russian-US contacts in August. It is evident that Zelensky is now the main opponent to a political resolution of the Ukrainian crisis, which will uncover his illegitimacy. Without the conflict, the justification for the legal vacuum will disappear. This justification, which he is using to cling to power in circumvention of constitutional procedures. Even according to the data of Ukrainian sociological centers, Zelensky's ratings are falling precipitously, as is the level of trust in him. In this context, the unabated military actions, hostilities, are a tool for political survival of the Ukrainian regime. Against the backdrop of this, what is becoming clear is the level of despair prompting the Kiev authorities to throw remnants of the people forcibly mobilized into battle, or more accurately, to slaughter, despite the colossal losses and skyrocketing desertion rates. Official data for 2025 shows that more than 140,000 criminal cases have been initiated for soldiers who abandoned their units. The overall figures for desertion since the start of the conflict are nearing 266,000 people. The effective stabbing levels in combat units at 50% is viewed as a success, and the real losses exceeding 15 to 20,000 people per month has long ago outstripped the pace of mobilization. People no longer wish to die for a corrupt leadership which long ago has ceased to represent the interests of society. The head of the UAF, Syrsky, recently recognized that Russia has a threefold advantage in manpower and capabilities, and in the main areas has a 4 to 6-fold advantage. This is a frank recognition of failure and essentially an indictment of the current military political policy. And this is precisely why Zelensky today is willing to do anything at all to maintain this conflict in the active phase, even if this may give rise to threats, if this means simulating threats, exaggerating consequences, or, as was the case in Przewod, manipulating any incident in order to drag NATO countries into the war. What is noteworthy is how easily the head of the Kiev regime recants his own loud statements as soon as they no longer advance his political interests. In recent months, he invoked slogans about the supposed intention to engage in dialogue. However, the direct, unambiguous proposal from the Russian president to visit our capital to discuss the whole gamut of issues related to Ukrainian resolution was rejected by him under the pretext of the inadmissibility and the inability to travel, quote, while his country is under attack. And yet, as we see, there have been no attacks which prevented him from trekking to European capitals for 3+ years and making demands for more weapons deliveries and increased military assistance. Because in those capitals, the discussion is about continuing the war and this is completely in line with his interests. As soon as a real opportunity for peace emerged, with a visit to with a White House leader taking office who is willing to deal with the root causes of the crisis and to seek a lasting solution, Zelensky immediately began to renounce the previously announced peace initiative. This merely bears out what we were pointing to from the very start. The Kiev regime never had any intention to embrace peace, and everything that the regime is doing is to prolong the conflict, to cling to power, and to continue to take advantage of his Western sponsors. Weapons deliveries, sanctions misadventures, and Brussels propagandistic hysteria do not bring peace any closer, but rather entrenches the illusion in Kiev that they will manage to change the reality. However, it is not possible to change the reality. Every new month of hostilities merely brings the regime closer to collapse and raises the cost of resolution. The Russian Federation remains wedded to a responsible approach. We are open to constructive cooperation with everybody who genuinely is focused on de-escalation and establishment of peace in Europe, not pursuing the conflict for the sake of parochial political advantages. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing and take note of her remarks. We welcome the presence of Poland's Secretary of State in this meeting. Mr. President, merely a glance at both the contemporary as well as past history is enough to draw a fundamental conclusion about conflicts. Conflicts, especially those continuing for a longer duration, have a greater risk of degenerating into wider conflagration. Given the interconnected nature of our world, the negative externalities from a localized conflict can have far-reaching consequences, impacting not only the regional, but also global security and stability. Mr. President, alongside many of our fellow council members, Pakistan has repeatedly drawn attention to the negative repercussions that the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has had, far beyond its geographical expanse. We have therefore called for the need to bring an end to this conflict. We take note of Poland's letter of 10th September addressed to this council, reporting violations of its airspace. Pakistan is an ardent proponent and adherent of the UN Charter and the principles contained therein. We firmly hold that sovereignty and territorial integrity of all member states is sacrosanct and must be respected. Mr. President, Pakistan remains deeply concerned by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the humanitarian tragedy unfolding as a result of it. We have consistently said and repeat once again, military solutions are counterproductive and serve only to sow seeds for future conflicts. We are dismayed by the recent escalation in fighting and note with deep regret that diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict have, thus far, remained inconclusive and without meaningful progress. Mr. President, Pakistan's position from the very outset has been clear and consistent. We have always called upon the parties to demonstrate restraint, scrupulously adhere to the international humanitarian law, make meaningful strides towards de-escalation, and give primacy to dialogue and diplomacy. We firmly believe that only a sincere and meaningful dialogue which addresses security concerns of all sides is anchored in the principles of UN Charter and international law and respects the relevant multilateral agreements can help secure peace, which is both just and enduring. Pakistan stands ready to support all regional and international efforts that pave the way for a peaceful resolution of this conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank USG DiCarlo for her briefing. We welcome the participation of the Secretary of State of Poland in this meeting. Since the onset of this conflict, Sierra Leone has joined the international community in calling for its end, urging the parties to embrace diplomatic negotiations towards a ceasefire that prevents further death and suffering. The conflict has already taken tens of thousands of lives, caused mass displacement, and deprived millions of basic needs. Its destabilizing impact has been felt not only in Europe, but across the world. The recent reports of Russian drones entering airspace of Poland mark an alarming escalation. According to the letter from Poland's permanent representative, 19 drones launched from Russia and Belarusian territory violated Poland's airspace between 9th and 10th September, described rightly by Poland as an unprecedented violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We note that in response, Poland invoked NATO's Article 4 and imposed new restrictions, including border closures with Belarus and the deployment of troops along its eastern flank. We also note that other states in the region have followed with airspace restrictions and heightened security measures. These actions underscore the gravity of the threat. They also remind us that the longer this war persists without a peaceful resolution, the more likely it will metastasize into a regional conflagration with consequences for global security. Mr. President, this event must be situated within a wider pattern: the ongoing erosion of international law and the weakening of the rules-based international legal order anchored in the UN Charter. The Charter enshrines the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Article 2.3 obliges member states to resolve their disputes by peaceful means while refraining from the threat of use of force. Yet today, these principles are increasingly disregarded. The disregard for sovereignty and international territorial integrity in this conflict, the repeated resort to force, and the inability of the Council to secure even temporary ceasefires together reflect a deeper crisis. The threat from the very foundation of collective security. If this trajectory continues, the war stands at the precipice of unrestrained escalation where brute forces replace dialogue and law gives way to power politics. Accordingly, let me make 3 observations. First, the heightened tensions resulting from the Polish incident threaten to derail ongoing efforts at peace. As European states have long sought diplomatic solutions to end this war, their engagement remains essential for a sustainable peace settlement and the eventual reconstruction of Ukraine. Second, the war has exposed the fragility of global economic and security systems. A further regional escalation will not only fracture Europe, but also undermine the multilateral order painstakingly constructed after the Second World War. It will erode trust in the Charter, embolden violations elsewhere, and weaken the fabric of international law. Third, any negotiations or agreements to end this conflict must be grounded in international law. Sierra Leone reiterates its support for a political settlement that respects Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its nationally recognized borders while addressing the legitimate security concerns of all parties. Mr. President, the human cost of this war remains unbearable. Thus, this Council must not allow this suffering to persist. Sierra Leone urges all parties to commit to peace and to engage in good faith negotiations. We commend the ongoing efforts by the United States, European leaders, and other mediators, but more is required. We renewed political engagement at the highest levels to address the underlying strategic issues and concerns. Above all, the Council must insist on full adherence to international law, including international humanitarian law. Civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected. Humanitarian access must be unhindered, and diplomacy must be pursued with urgency and determination. Mr. President, the Security Council was established to safeguard international peace and security, not to witness its unraveling. Each violation of sovereignty, each missile fired into civilian neighborhoods, and each failure to uphold the Charter brings us closer to a dangerous abyss. The world is at the precipice. It is our collective duty to pull it back by recommitting to the principles of the Charter, by upholding international law, and by insisting on the peaceful settlement of disputes. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, I would like to thank you for convening this important meeting. I also thank Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her insightful briefing. And I welcome the participation of His Excellency, the Secretary of State of Poland, to this meeting. Mr. President, we took note of the recent concerning reports about the Russian unmanned aerial vehicles in the airspace of the Republic of Poland, as well as the information provided by the Russian Federation regarding these incidents. These developments constitute yet another escalation of the already tense situation in the region caused by the war between Russia and Ukraine. Algeria has, time and again, insisted on the need to avoid escalation and polarization in the region. so as to prevent any spread of the conflict. When the logic of confrontation has already shown its limits in bringing about peace, the recent diplomatic talks proved that dialogue could achieve what war couldn't in more than 3 years. Against this backdrop, I would like to highlight the following points. First, it is highly important to keep the momentum from recent diplomatic efforts and to avoid any escalation that could hinder ending the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and achieving peace and security in the region. Second, equally important is to favor communication between the parties, aiming at establishing the facts surrounding these incidents and addressing their consequences. Last but not least, Algeria reiterates its call to prioritize restraint over escalation, dialogue over confrontation, and diplomacy above all. Tensions have reached unprecedented levels, and it is high time to achieve just and lasting peace in Ukraine and the entire region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. We're grateful for the briefing provided by Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under-Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. We also recognize the participation of the Secretary of State of Poland, Mr. Bosacki, and the other delegations who are here with us this afternoon. We are meeting here today to address the grave incident that occurred over Poland's airspace in the context of the aggression against Ukraine. We think it is important for the circumstances of what happened to be urgently established, because at least 19 drones were registered in Poland's airspace during a period of some 7 hours. This undeniably constitutes a serious violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Poland, this member state of this organization, and it is a worrying escalation and further destabilizes the region. Panama, in this context, wishes to reaffirm that multilateralism, preventive diplomacy, and dialogue with a view to upholding international law are the only legitimate way to prevent further escalation. This Council cannot overlook the fact that defending the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states is not an abstract ideal. Upholding these principles is rather a moral and legitimate obligation that underpins the international order, the rules-based order, and which protects peoples from the law of the strongest. Experience shows that war, when it is not stopped in time, can spread beyond its immediate borders, and it can drag the entire world into tragedy and sorrow. This collective memory should serve as a warning to us. We cannot allow the erosion of the principles of the United Nations Charter to lead us down this path once again. President, Panama reiterates its full support to the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Poland, in line with the principles enshrined in the Charter. We also reiterate the urgent call to all parties involved to take measures to de-escalate the situation and to establish clear communication urgently in order to reduce risks and to avoid further regional destabilization. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Republic of Korea. I'd like to begin by thanking USG DiCarlo for the timely briefing. And I also welcome His Excellency, Mr. Marcin Bosacki, Secretary of State of Poland, to participate in this meeting. Colleagues, the recent drone incidents near Poland's eastern border is not an isolated event. Indeed, it is a stark reminder that the battlefield may no longer be confined to Ukraine. We have concerns that what we are seeing can lead to the horizontal expansion of an illegal war, spilling across borders, threatening the peace and security of neighboring states. We take note with particular alarm over Poland's account of this event, indicating that this was not accidental, but rather a deliberate and premeditated act. It would mark a dangerous turning point, where the war may no longer be contained, but spreading into Europe. Colleagues, let us recall, this war was illegal from the very beginning, launched in clear violation of the UN Charter, throughout the unlawful use of force. But what is more concerning is how its illegality has further deepened and metastasized in at least the three following ways. First, as these incidents demonstrate, the unlawful use of force seems to be spreading geographically, pushing the front lines far beyond Ukraine and into sovereign territory of other nations. This is a deeply destabilizing trend. Second, we continue to see systematic and indiscriminate attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure in blatant violation of international humanitarian law. One instance from this week illustrates the human cost. Just this past Tuesday, a Russian glide bomb struck a site in Donetsk, killing 24 people, many of them elderly Ukrainians, simply waiting in line to collect their monthly pensions. Third, the unexpected consequence of this war, the continuing military cooperation between Russia and the DPRK, which constitutes, again, a flagrant violation of Security Council resolutions and the direct threat to peace in both Europe and Asia. It must stop immediately. Colleagues, the Republic of Korea hopes that the political will led by the United States and supported by responsible members of the international community to bring an end to the war will not diminish. Before that common will is exhausted, we must allow today's meeting to serve not as just another record of outreach, but as a resounding wake-up call. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Marcin Bosacki, Secretary of State of Poland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Excellencies. I'd like to begin by thanking the Republic of Korea for convening today's meeting and Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for her excellent briefing. I also want to thank representatives of many Security Council members for your words, but also actions of support and solidarity with Poland. Allow me to start with a quote. "The merchants of death are unbothered by the fact that their weapons methodically, deliberately, and intentionally hit civilian targets. The blood of dozens of dead civilians is on the hands and conscience of those who arm the regime. End of quote. Thus spoke Sergei Lavrov, Russian foreign minister, here in this very room at the UN Security Council meeting on Ukraine a year ago. Russian officials have repeatedly accused others, primarily Ukraine and its allies, of engaging in terrorist attacks by using drones to target non-military infrastructure. The opposite is true. In fact, it is Russia that uses these weapons against civilians. Events in Poland just 2 days ago prove once again every Russian accusation eventually turns out to be a confession. Today, for the very first time in history, emergency meeting of UN Security Council was called upon a Polish request. We did that, we asked for that, to declare that the sky over Poland, my country, a sovereign state, has been deliberately violated by Russia. On the night of September 9th and 10th, 19 Russian military drones flying over the territory of both Ukraine and Belarus breached Polish airspace, thus trespassing borders of Poland, of NATO, and of the European Union. Such incidents happened before, but this time we know that that was the first time since the beginning of Russian full-scale invasion on Ukraine in 2022 that Polish territorial integrity has been purposely violated on such an unprecedented scale. We know, and I repeat, we know that it was not a mistake. Poland, together with allied Dutch, German, and Italian military forces, acted calmly, professionally, and decisively, executing our right to defend territorial integrity. The drones that threatened Polish citizens and critical infrastructure were shot down preemptively. Drones are instruments of terror that have shattered homes and communities across Ukraine. 2 days ago, they tried to target Polish homes. This is one of them in a village called Wyryki in eastern Poland. A representative of the Russian Federation claimed that maybe these were not Russian drones. This is the evidence of that, including signs in Russian on the parts of the drone. I don't want to spend too much of your precious time on the Orwellian or neo-Orwellian language of our Russian colleague, combined with blatant lies. But let me just draw your attention into one factor. He kept repeating that the reason of this, again, neo-Orwellian phrase, alleged aggression, which caused, as he himself admitted, hundreds of thousands of innocent victims so far. The cause of it was illegitimate regime or fascist regime. You know, we in the region remember the same kind of rhetoric by Russian diplomats when Russia, then Soviet Russia, attacked Czechoslovakia in 1968, Hungary in 1956, or Poland, together with Nazi Germany in September 1939 after the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. The fact is that in the region, among the neighbors of Russia, everybody is free, prosperous, and happy when there are no Russian troops on this country's soil. And one can only hope that Ukraine will be liberated from Russia's forces and will follow the suit, the history of Poland, Baltic states, Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia wants to set the region on fire. Here, in this chamber, sits a permanent member of Security Council as a judge in its own case, violating the UN Charter of which this very country should serve as defender and warrantor. We call upon the Council to respond to Russian criminal actions with unified, unequivocal, and immediate condemnation. Condemnation that should serve as a critical preventive measure to de-escalate the situation and deter further acts of this kind. As for Russia, we expect to take full responsibility for this unjustified act, to fully explain the reasons for the intrusion, and to take all necessary measures so such incidents will not repeat in the future. One more important thought. You know, our Russian colleague called it possibly malfunction, or mistake, or coincidence. You know, once or twice it can be a coincidence or malfunction, but not 19 times, not 19 intrusions conducted within 7 hours. And not only those drones, those Russian military drones, flew through the airspace of Ukraine. They also, which your ally, President Lukashenko, admitted, were flown through Belarusian airspace. The way to achieve stability and peace in the region is simple. Russia must stop its barbaric war against Ukraine. Poland will not be intimidated. Our resolve to stand with Ukraine and defend the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity remains unwavering. Thank you all very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Bosacki for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will speak on behalf of the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and my own country, Latvia. And I thank the Presidency of the Council for convening this meeting, and thank the USG DiCarlo for her briefing. In the early hours of 10th of September, Poland saw the largest number of Russian drones illegally entering its territory. The Baltic states condemn the violation of Poland's airspace, and we stand in full solidarity with our Polish allies. The Baltic states recall that this is neither a first time nor an isolated incident in our region. All Baltic states have had Russian assets enter our airspace illegally in the past year. Russia's reckless actions are most concerning for the overall security of the region. This is yet another escalation by a permanent member of the UN Security Council against sovereign territory of another state.
Another test of the entire rules-based international order, a violation of the UN Charter, customary international law, as well as the fundamental principles of the Helsinki Final Act. There are concerns of further provocations as Russia and Belarus militarily exercises commenced today near our borders. Mr. President, the international response to the violation of the sovereign airspace of Poland has been swift, clear, and united. Russia's actions have been unequivocally condemned, and we urge that Russia fully respects the UN Charter, and we urge that Russia stops the violation of European airspace, that it stops the violation of international borders. The UN Charter is also clear. Countries have an inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs, and we will exercise the sovereign right and collective right to defend ourselves against any attacks. Mr. President, the violation of Poland's airspace is yet another call to the international community to remain vigilant. This also shows why we, the neighbors of Russia and Belarus, are the staunchest supporters of Ukraine. Our European global security is tied to the security of Ukraine. We all want peace in our neighborhood and along our borders, and Ukrainians want peace the most, as they are under constant attack and experience daily atrocities. Today's meeting, unfortunately, draws the same conclusions as during the Security Council meeting we had 2 weeks ago on Ukraine. These Russian actions are not of a country that seeks peace. Allow me to ask a question, a rhetorical one. How has Russia reacted to the global call towards just and lasting peace? What signals has Russia been sending while everyone is calling for a full and unconditional ceasefire? Let me just point out a few atrocities that have happened since the last time we met in this chamber. 2 Russian missiles hit and killed members of a Danish humanitarian demining team in Chernihiv region. Russia launched the largest aerial assault on Ukrainian cities with over 800 drones and missiles. It hit the Ukrainian government building with a missile. A Russian glide bomb killed more than 20 people, mostly elderly, waiting in line for their monthly pensions in Donetsk region. Are these actions indicating any readiness to stop the war and the killing of civilians? I don't think the answer. Are these actions indicating any readiness to stop the war and the killing of civilians? I don't think the answer is unclear. The violation of Poland's airspace is just yet another escalation, another violation of international law that Russia has made excuses for without changing action. This only strengthens our resolute support to Ukraine, its independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. And we call on the Security Council to fulfill its role, the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, in accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations. And Russia must be stopped. It only understands peace if it is delivered through strength. And we are united both in support of Ukraine and the defense and security of our nations and our allies. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Benelux countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, and my own country, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I would like to thank the Republic of Korea for convening this meeting and USG DiCarlo for her briefing. This week, Russian drones violated Polish airspace and therewith EU airspace, NATO airspace. Polish, Italian, and Dutch fighter aircraft succeeded in tracking and shooting down Russian drones over Poland. Benelux countries stand in solidarity with our Polish allies, and we remain ready to provide any further support. We condemn this violation of Polish airspace in the strongest possible terms. It is a reckless and dangerous act by the Russian Federation, risking further escalation. In doing so, Russia is violating the UN Charter and threatening the security of innocent citizens, regional stability, and international peace and security. This was not an isolated incident and cannot be ignored. This incident demonstrates that if Russia's aggression remains unchecked, it is bound to repeat itself. It also demonstrates Ukrainian and European security are closely interlinked. The actions by the Russian Federation have only strengthened our resolve. Benelux countries will continue to pursue coordinated military, humanitarian, and budget support to Ukraine in order to bolster its efforts to defend itself and rebuild the country. Benelux countries call upon all countries to actively support Ukraine in its fight to survive. Because it's not just about Ukraine or about Europe. We need to show that we take a stand against violations of internationally recognized borders and that we will protect the UN Charter. Aggression cannot become the new norm. This affects us all. We call upon the Russian Federation to fully comply with international law and the Charter, especially given its status as permanent member of this Council. Russia needs to stop its illegal aggression against Ukraine and its reckless behavior against Europe. The Russian Federation must demonstrate genuine political will to end its war of aggression and engage in constructive and meaningful negotiations. Benelux countries call on this Council to take tangible steps towards a full, unconditional and immediate ceasefire, so these incidents cannot repeat themselves. We will continue our active contribution to all efforts, bringing a comprehensive, just and lasting peace closer. I thank you.
I thank the representative of a Kingdom of the Netherlands for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Belarus.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Madame De Carlo, for a briefing. The Republic of Belarus has always based itself on the priority need for exclusively peaceful conflict resolution. We see no other ways to end the brutal confrontation other than through dialogue on the basis of mutual respect, trust, and equality of the parties. We welcome the current diplomatic initiatives which are geared towards facilitating direct negotiations. We trust that the results of the recent bilateral summit, the Russia-U.S. summit in Alaska, that this will generate tangible results for the peace process. In this connection, we note the efforts of the U.S. President to usher in a prompt resolution to the conflict. We have always stated, and we continue to emphasize, that it is important in principle to achieve a ceasefire and to move towards agreements with robust, categorical guarantees, both vis-à-vis Ukraine and vis-à-vis Russia. We regret that today during today's meeting, Poland accused Belarus of escalating the situation and disregarding international law. We repudiate any claims focused on us in connection with the incident of the breach of Polish airspace with drones on the night of 10 September. These accusations sound particularly baseless, given the fact that the Republic of Belarus was the first, possibly the only party to have informed the Polish side about the approach of drones. Belarus spoke at length about this topic. I merely wish to quote the head of General Staff, the First Deputy Defense Minister of the Republic of Belarus, made on 10 September, and I quote, "During the nighttime exchange of strikes by UAVs between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, the air defense forces and assets of the Republic of Belarus on duty continuously tracked the UAVs that had veered off course as a result of the impact of the party's electronic warfare assets. Some of the lost drones were destroyed by our country's air defense forces over the territory of the Republic. According to existing channels of engagement, during the period from 23 o'clock on 9 September to 4 o'clock on 10 September, our air defense forces and assets exchange information on the air and radio location situation with the Polish and Lithuanian air defense forces and assets. Thereby, we informed them of the approach of unknown drones approaching the territory of their country. This allowed the Polish side to respond promptly to the drones by scrambling their forces on duty." End of quote. I would add that in this situation, the Republic of Belarus was completely transparent in its action and its readiness to promptly cooperate, having informed Poland well in advance, and we can state immediately to the extent that this was possible. In response, we have been hearing unsubstantiated rhetoric and allegations against Poland. And we would note, incidentally, that Polish military services were more accurate and correct in their statements. According to the head of the Chief of Staff of the Polish Army, General Wisław Kukul, and I quote, the Belarusians warned us that the drones were approaching our side, end of quote. Based on the statements of Polish military personnel, such cooperation was surprising to them, but it was accepted and embraced. It is important to stress here that the Polish side informed the Belarusian air defense assets and forces about the approach towards the border of the Republic of Belarus of identified drones from Ukrainian territory. As was announced by the General Staff of the Republic of Belarus, the exchange of information about air activity is a critical component for security in the region as a whole and helps to establish confidence-building measures and to ensure security. The Republic of Belarus will continue to fulfill its obligations as part of the exchange of information on the air situation with the Republic of Belarus and Baltic states. It is absolutely clear that our actions show that there is no escalation whatsoever emanating from the Republic of Belarus, and this is not something that we can say when it comes to neighboring countries. It is telling that this meeting is being held immediately after the closure by Poland of the land border with the Republic of Belarus. All of the crossing points on the border with Poland ceased to function as of tonight, 12th of September. Vehicular and rail transportations have been halted, transit has been paralyzed, and the movement of people has been stopped. Is it not this situation which poses a real threat to stability in the region? The decision of the Polish authorities to close the border with Belarus is an example of baseless steps taken against the people, against ordinary citizens, both in Belarus and Poland, as well as against foreign citizens. These actions create significant difficulties for the normal operations in international movement of people and goods, and is detrimental to many states, both in the East and in the West. This represents a blatant abuse of their geographical location, the privatization of the borders of the EU, EA-EU, the West, and the East. Such measures are building upon the policy of undermining relations with neighboring countries and further fueling escalation of tensions in the region, which creates risks to stability and predictability in international relations. The leadership of the United Nations and the European Union should issue a principled assessment of such action. We call upon the Security Council to consider this action and to duly respond. Instead of destabilizing rhetoric and conduct, we call upon all parties to revert back to constructive cooperation and dialogue. Once again, Belarus is committed to purely peaceful steps to resolve the confrontation. We stand ready to continue to facilitate mutually acceptable solutions to the conflict. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Belarus for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Georgia, as well as Iceland, Norway, Andorra, and Monaco, align themselves with this statement. Thank you, Mr. President, for the Presidency's readiness to convene this emergency meeting. Thank you to USG DiCarlo for briefing, and thank you as well to the State Secretary of Poland for his presence here today. Let me express, of course, my full solidarity with Poland, a member state of the European Union. Our leaders have been in constant contact with their Polish counterparts the past days, and we are offering support in protecting Poland's eastern border. The European Union condemns in the strongest terms the international violation of the airspace of one of our member states by Russian drones, which took place on 10 September. This is an aggressive and reckless act and part of a broader escalation by Russia. It threatens the security of EU citizens, regional stability, and international peace. Only 2 weeks ago, Russian missiles caused severe damage to the EU delegation in Kiev. And now, 19 of its drones have violated our airspace. It is the latest in a series of violations of EU member states' sovereign airspace that have occurred since 2022. And it only strengthens our resolve to support Ukraine and its people in their defense against Russia and in their pursuit of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. The EU underlines the importance of raising the costs for Moscow further. We will ramp up sanctions significantly on Russia and its enablers, and we will also work with our international partners to put pressure on Russia to end this war. The EU remains steadfast in supporting a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine based on international law, including the UN Charter, which respects Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, and also respects Ukraine's inherent right to self-defense. Mr. President, it goes without saying that our resolve to support Ukraine and its people in their defense against Russia remains unwavering. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lambrinis for his statement. And I give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Mr. President, distinguished members of this Council, dear State Secretary Bosacki, back in February this year, the Security Council adopted a very short resolution, 2774, imploring, and I quote, a swift end to the conflict and further urging a lasting peace between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. Let me remind you, Ukraine was not exactly thrilled with that text. We made no secret of our disappointment, but unlike Russia, that even though it voted in favor of that resolution and now does not give a damn about it, we do respect all the decisions of this Council, and we remain ready and committed to implement them. And yet, here we are, 201 days later, we all have to confess that peace has not come galloping toward us on a white horse. On the contrary, we are further away from peace than we have ever been. The human toll is catastrophic. Ukraine has suffered more civilian casualties over the last months than at any time since Russia's full-scale invasion began. And just 2 days ago, Moscow decided it was not enough to keep murdering Ukrainians. Russia is spreading this conflagration in Europe, launching now its deadly drones into Poland's airspace. Let me express Ukraine's full solidarity with the Polish people. We condemn this cynical provocation, this brazen attack. Let me also be clear, we fully share the assessment of Polish authorities that this was not a technical error, it was not a lost GPS signal, or any other fairy tales that we have heard today. It was a conscious decision. It was a conscious decision of Russia to cross yet another red line and test our patience, the patience of the international community. And it was a conscious decision of Russia to deliberately escalate this war. And if this escalation is left without a decisive reaction, Russia will not stop with Poland. Tomorrow, it could be drones or even missiles falling on Berlin, Paris, or London, and the day after, who knows, something might even accidentally cross the Atlantic. So today we face a choice. Does this Council continue to wait until hell freezes over before we act, or do we finally do what this Council was created to do? End once and again this bloody war before it destroys the entire planet. That is why the question of an immediate ceasefire is not an academic one. For months, Ukraine has been calling upon this Council to pass a resolution on a comprehensive and unconditional ceasefire. We cannot afford to sit here and wait for fair weather at sea while the storm rages, tearing our sails apart. It is the solemn duty of this Council to prevent this scenario before it is too late and to stop this madness before it swallows us all. By sending drones to Ukraine and now to Poland, our neighbor, Russia is not just mocking this Council, it is spitting in your face, and yet we politely pretend that it is only raining. If this Council does not act, if it fails to stop this new phase of Russia's escalation, we are not talking about regional instability any longer. We are staring into the abyss of a third world war. Colleagues, this Council should have imposed crashing sanctions on Russia no later than dawn on 21st of February 2022. Instead, we have allowed the arsonist in the Kremlin to keep the keys to the fire station. Russia continues to abuse its veto as a fig leaf to cover its war crimes and block every attempt to restore peace. But must this Council remain a hostage of this veto, condemned to wring its hands and watch as thousands of civilians die? Absolutely not. Nothing, and I repeat, nothing, prevents the other 14 members sitting on this table and every single UN member state from doing what dozens of nations did in the first weeks and months of this war. The EU, the United Nations, the United States, the UK, Canada, Republic of Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and many others. You can impose unilateral but coordinated sanctions that will choke Russia's war machine, cut off its supply chains, and stop the flow of components for those murderous drones and missiles that kill Ukrainians today and threaten to kill our European neighbors tomorrow, as Moscow did just 2 days ago in Poland. And one day history will knock on this door and ask, what did you do sitting at this table while Russia was trampling on the UN Charter? Did you act, or did you just clear your throat, draft another deeply concerned statement, or just look away, bury your head in the sand, and then proceed to the next agenda item? Mr. President, colleagues, we are not in Samuel Beckett's play to amuse ourselves with endless waiting. The world burns while we twiddle our thumbs, waiting for Godot, who will never arrive. So please, dear colleagues, table this ceasefire resolution now. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. This meeting is adjourned.
Professor